Hello, lovely people. Now, I know, you're getting pretty sick of being told about the coronavirus and how you should be washing your hands and blah, 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 and oh my god, it's so oversaturated in your daily content consumption, but at the same time, you are morbidly fascinated and still eating up every single thing you see about it. Clearly, since you clicked on this video. Well, I'm feeling much the same, and I'm feeling pretty out of control. And when I feel out of control, I turn to the history books, because knowing that massive global pandemics have happened before, but the world kept on turning, and life just continued on, and clearly it wasn't so earth-shattering in the end, because here I am, alive, and existing, and talking. And here you are, alive, existing, and watching. Well, that just makes me feel a whole lot better. But what doesn't make me feel better, as someone who has an underlying health condition and is therefore vulnerable when it comes to the coronavirus, is people not understanding the importance of how symptom-free carriers can spread sickness. And thus maybe you're watching this video because it was sent to you as you're being a bit of a wally who won't stay home. Social distancing. It works. Do it. And that's why today we're going to be learning about poor, tragic Mary Mallon, otherwise known as Typhoid Mary, one of the first identified super spreaders of disease. Mary's case demonstrates how an unwitting carrier can be the root of a disease outbreak, but it also sparks a debate about how far personal autonomy can go when it's pitted against public health. This video is part of my historical profile series, in which we learn the fun history we should have been taught in school through the lives of queer and or disabled people. You'll find all of the previous episodes in a playlist in the card above. If you have a suggestion of who I should cover next, please do leave it in the comments below and subscribe to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Mary was a breakthrough in our learning of how disease can spread and how unwitting, asymptomatic carriers can harm others even if they aren't themselves at risk. A century later, and we're still learning about how quarantine can save lives. But before we can think about what it means in current times, let's learn about her story. Mary Mallon was born in 1868 in Cookstown, County Tyrone, in what is now Northern Ireland. She migrated with a sister to the United States of America in around 1883 to live with her aunt and uncle and work as cooks for affluent families in New York City. In 1900, she began working in Mamaroneck, New York, where within 2 weeks of her employment, residents developed typhoid fever, and she thus had to move on. In 1901, she worked for a family in Manhattan, where, again, members of the family for whom she worked developed fevers and diarrhea, and their laundress died. She switched to working for the family of a lawyer, but left when again 7 of the 8 people in the household took ill. In August 1906, Mary took a position with a wealthy family in Oyster Bay, Long Island, but within 2 weeks, 10 of the 11 family members were hospitalized with typhoid. We might look at that history and think, gosh, seems fishy. But typhoid fever is a bacterial infection typically spread through food and water contaminated by salmonella. Patients fall ill with a high fever, diarrhea, and before antibiotics were developed to treat it, sometimes delirium and death. This was the early 1900s, however, and since there were no regulated sanitation practices in place, the disease was fairly common and New York had battled multiple outbreaks. This wasn't particularly strange to Mary, and because she was completely oblivious, she just kept moving on. Mary went back to New York City and changed jobs 3 more times, and unsurprisingly, the same thing kept happening. But the wealthy family who lived in Oyster Bay hired a typhoid researcher and civil engineer named George Soper to investigate, expecting, perhaps, to find a contaminated water source. Through a process of elimination, he realised, however, that it was the family's cook who was the missing link. Soper began tracing other outbreaks in the local area and realised that in a number of cases an Irish cook who fit the same physical description had worked for the families. At first he was unable to locate her because she generally left immediately after an outbreak began and without leaving a forwarding address. All he could do was wait. As the months turned warm again, Soper learned of an active outbreak in a penthouse on Park Avenue. 2 of the servants had been hospitalised and the family's daughter had died. When Soper arrived, he discovered that Mary had not only been their cook, she was still there. However, when confronted with his evidence and a request for urine and feces samples, she surged at Soper with a carving fork. The word confronted probably explains that, to be fair. He sought the help of the authorities, but Mary evaded them for 5 hours before being betrayed by a scrap of her dress caught in the door of her hiding place. George Soper was a civil engineer by training and he'd become an expert in sanitation, but he was not a doctor. Despite this, he had deduced that typhoid could be spread by one person serving as a carrier, whether or not they had any symptoms. With Mary, absolutely refusing to give samples, Sopper instead compiled a 5-year history of Mallon's employment. He found that of the 8 families that hired Mary as a cook, members of 7 had contracted typhoid fever, 22 infected people in fact. It hadn't raised red flags at first because, it was 1906, and in the year that Sopper began his investigation, a reported 639 people had died of typhoid in New York. But never before had an outbreak been traced to a single carrier, and definitely not one without any symptoms themselves. In fact, it wasn't even common knowledge that someone could have typhoid without symptoms. Finally, Mary was escorted by 5 policemen to a hospital where, after a nearly successful escape attempt, she tested positive as a carrier for Salmonella typhi, a bacteria that causes typhoid. The key was in the fresh fruit dishes that Mary served on Sundays in the summer months. Whilst cooking the food she had touched killed the bacteria transferred from Mary's hands, uncooked foods were the perfect way to spread disease. The New York City health inspector determined she was a carrier and was just quarantined in a small house on the grounds of Riversdale Hospital, an isolated facility on North Brother Island just off the Bronx, for 3 years. So stop complaining about social distancing for 3 months. In prison, she was forced to give regular stool and urine samples, and despite never developing symptoms, or receiving treatment apparently, she tested positive every time. Authorities suggested removing her gallbladder because they believed that typhoid bacteria resided there, but they stopped just short of doing it against her will as she'd attracted a lot of media attention. Mary continued to believe that it was impossible for her to actually have the disease. She'd seen people die from typhoid. They looked ill. She felt fine. A 1908 issue of the Journal of the American Medical Association named her Typhoid Mary, and the public ran with it. Mary's resentment and distrust grew. In 1909, she sued the New York City Department of Health, and the case was brought to the Supreme Court. Mary's case stirred a debate over individual autonomy and the state's responsibility in a public health crisis. America was then, as it is today, a culture founded on personal liberty that takes the rights of the individual very seriously. Her lawyer argued that she'd been imprisoned without due process, and the court of public opinion was on her side. Despite the judge declining to release her on the grounds that the court must protect the community against a reoccurrence of spreading the disease, she was freed the following year by the city's new health commissioner, who wanted some good press, on the grounds that she stopped cooking. Which, why would she do that? She didn't have symptoms, so she didn't have typhoid, right? February 19, 1920, Mallon agreed that she was prepared to change her occupation and would give assurance by affidavit that she would, upon her release, take such hygienic precautions as would protect those with whom she came in contact from infection. And good luck with that. Oh, sure. To start with, Mary tried. On her release, she was given a job as a laundress, but it paid so much less than cooking, and it wasn't good for her hands to be in hot water all day. Except it was good for her hands because the heat killed the diseases shed from them, but oh well. After a few years, she changed her name to Mary Brown and returned to cooking, despite the explicit instructions not to. For the next 5 years, she worked in a number of kitchens, again followed by outbreaks of typhoid. She changed jobs frequently, always trying to outrun George Sopper and his detective team. But in 1915, Mary started a major outbreak, this time at Sloan Hospital for Women in New York City, infecting 25 people. She left after the first 2 deaths, but this time the police managed to outpace her, and she was arrested, still protesting that the outbreak had nothing to do with her. She was healthy. Healthy people didn't have typhoid. Except they did. They were just less likely to die from it. She was returned to quarantine on North Border Island on March 27th, 1915, and because she refused to believe that she was a danger, remained confined for the next 23 years. 23 years! Are you paying attention? Mary remained confined for the remainder of her life, despite becoming a minor celebrity. People were told not to accept even a glass of water from her, and although she was later allowed to work in the hospital laboratory, washing glass bottles, it must have been an incredibly lonely existence. Although doctors frequently tested her and told her she was still positive, they left her largely ignorant about her condition, failing to explain how she could carry the virus and kill those weaker than her without feeling any symptoms herself. So aren't we lucky that today we have doctors on the news trying to explain things for us? Mary died from pneumonia in 1938 at the age of 69, vilified in folk memory as the most dangerous woman in America, a patient zero who had to be locked up and isolated until her death because she refused to work for the public good. History has been unkind to Mary, and today the colloquial term Typhoid Mary is used for anyone who, knowingly or not, spreads evil or disease. There's even a Marvel comic book villain named after her, a female assassin who has a cruel temper. But by her second capture in quarantine, there were a number of other healthy typhoid carriers identified, but they weren't treated as harshly as Mary. Having said that, due to her use of aliases and refusal to cooperate, the exact number of deaths attributable to Mary is not known. Some have estimated that she may have unwittingly caused as many as 50 fatalities. Scholars believe, however, that as a poor, unmarried Irish immigrant and a woman, she suffered prejudice not shown to other asymptomatic typhoid carriers, including some who infected far more people than Mary, but were quarantined for only a few weeks. Today, we see workers in service industries and gig work across the world facing a choice about whether to isolate and stop working as a precaution against coronavirus, possibly forfeiting pay and health insurance, or to continue on. In 2001, the late television chef Anthony Bourdain defended Mary as a kindred spirit who worked because she needed to work. Cooks work sick. They always have. Most jobs, you don't work, you don't get paid. You wake up with a sniffle and a runny nose and a sore throat, you soldier on. It's a point of pride working through pain and illness. Mary's legacy as an asymptomatic vessel for disease led to the theory of superspreaders, which has helped end disease outbreaks faster ever since. The problem of carriers in relation to infectious diseases is now justly recognised as immensely important to effective public health work. Today we know that being a carrier of disease is not that unusual. Up to 6% of people who've had typhoid, which is still common in the developing world, can spread it long after they've recovered, even if they experienced few or no symptoms. Dr. Denise Monnick, a microbiologist at Stanford, has shown that genetic mutations might allow bacteria to climb unnoticed into immune cells where they can take up long-term residence, meaning the carrier can go on infecting people for years. For a long time, medical scholars have used Mary's case in debates over when the government is justified in depriving someone of their freedom for a perceived greater good. Mary's refusing to isolate and practice social distancing killed others, and it ruined her own life. Just as it might ruin the life of a healthy COVID-19 carrier to accidentally infect and kill someone else. I know, if you've watched this far into the video, you've probably already got the point I'm making, but it doesn't hurt to be on the nose occasionally. In 2015, a super spreading event led to 82 people being infected by a single hospital patient with Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, a coronavirus distantly related to COVID-19. And in the Ebola epidemic in West Africa, 61% of cases were spread by just 3% of patients. Today, we face social distancing and self-isolation, travel restrictions, bans on public gatherings, and strict surveillance. In some parts of China, there are rewards for informing on sick neighbours, and their drastic measures do seem to be working. At the time of filming this, they are now only reporting a handful of internally transmitted coronavirus cases a day, rather than the hundreds we were seeing just a few weeks ago. The debate about how far to curb individual liberty in order to protect public health rages on. And whilst Mary is certainly a cautionary tale in how the government can get the balance wrong, it also shows that we do have a personal responsibility to not infect other people, especially after a doctor tells us we're infectious. It's our duty to educate ourselves on what being a carrier means and how to reduce the spread of infection. If you're having symptoms or have come into contact with someone who has, please isolate yourself and seek medical attention as soon as possible if your symptoms worsen. For the rest of us, both those with and without underlying health conditions, it's our responsibility to take care of ourselves. Practice social distancing to slow the spread of the disease. Do not do anything stupid that may land you in the hospital, especially not if it's just to make a TikTok video, even if it is a hilarious one. And please take care of others in your community, especially vulnerable people, including the elderly or those with disabilities who may have trouble accessing food right now and the medicine that they need. Lastly, as much as I have spent this segment of the video nagging you not to spread disease, we need to be careful with the language we use when it comes to infected people, particularly super spreaders. They've picked something up through no fault of their own, and as long as they're not spreading the infection for the fun and licking public property, they need our support. Lecture over! Congrats! You made it to the end of the video. I promise to berate you less in the next one. See you soon!